announced that there was a trial and the guilty were held accountable for their crimes. Today is not the day that the victims get to go into a courtroom, in a public courtroom, and tell the story of horrific sexual abuse. Today is not that day. Today is the day of reckoning, though. Today is the day that we get to tell their stories. Today is the day that the Office of Attorney General stepped in and now comes forward to tell the stories that the victims of abuse could not tell themselves. And just as importantly, today is the day that we get to tell you why they aren't able to tell their stories. Today is the day we get to tell you why they are not inside of a courtroom. Today is the day we get to tell you why we cannot present this to a jury. Today is the day that we hear about. Today is the day that there have been stories about nationally. But today is the day we get to tell you exactly what happened in Pennsylvania. Today is an important day. It's an important day because as law enforcement officers of the court, the proud men and women behind me get to tell the stories of the victims. We get to be their voice. We get to speak for the powerless. We get to speak for children who are now grown adults, but were literally killed as children. Their souls were killed as children. They lost their childhood. They were thrust into an adult world that is unimaginable. They weren't out playing baseball. They were trying to avoid priests. They weren't moving on like other children. They weren't having meaningful relationships. They weren't trusting adults. They weren't trusting authority figures. They weren't trusting the law. They weren't trusting their faith. They weren't trusting anyone like children do. All of the things that we as parents hold on to for our children, we hold on to for as long as we possibly can because we know the adult world is coming soon enough and we want them to have that foundation. Over 50 priests committed horrendous acts upon hundreds of children. And hundreds of children today, who are now adults, are still suffering those consequences. So today is their day. And today is the day that we get to tell you why they can't be here. Today is the day that we release the report of the 37th statewide investigating grand jury. The grand jury had over 200 exhibits, took witness testimony, generated thousands of pages of grand jury transcripts, reviewed over 115,000 documents, and lasted almost 2 years. That investigation was initiated upon a referral by the District Attorney of Cambria County, Kelly Callahan, to the Office of Attorney General. And that was in 2014. By April of 2014, it was in the 37th grand jury. The findings of the grand jury relate to the Diocese of Altoona-Johnstown. Over many years, as I said, hundreds of children have fallen victim to child predators wrapped in the authority and the faith of those that they serve. The grand jury found that the actions of those involved, those in the leadership, those who are meant to protect children, those who are meant to supervise the priests in their charge, failed to protect the children that they were entrusted with their care and guidance. Today is the day that we tell you that this started 40 years ago. This abuse lasted for 4 decades. 4 decades. And not only was it covered up, not only were priests moved around, but Bishops Hogan and Ademick took actions to further endanger children as they placed their desire to avoid public scandal over the well-being of innocent children. This abuse took place at campsites, confession, an orphanage, children in foster homes. It took place at the cathedral. This is not an indictment of the Catholic Church or the Catholic religion. I'm Catholic. Many of the investigators, the agents and lawyers on the case are Catholic as well. This is a factual recitation of the victims' stories and of the cover-up that ensued. And the question is always, why? Why did it take so long? What happened? And how can we proceed and move on as better people and as a better society? And that's what this report attempts to accomplish. The Diocese of Altoona serves 8 counties: Bedford, Blair, Cambria, Center, Clinton, Fulton, Huntington, and Somerset. And as of 2010, the total Catholic population of this 8-county area was 94,000 people. Johnstown is the home of 89 parishes, 74 active priests, and 36 permanent deacons. The Catholic Church has a canon law system, and through that canon law system, the investigators and the agents and the Deputy Attorney Generals learned, according to Canon 486, Section 2, in every curia there is to be erected a safe place, a diocesan archive or record storage area in which instruments and handwritten documents which pertain to the spiritual and temporal affairs of the diocese are to be safeguarded after being properly filled and diligently secured. The next canon goes on to state the archive must be locked, and only the bishop and chancellor are to have its key. There's another canon that reiterates this same fact. Only the bishop is to have the key to the, quote, secret archive. Another canon states, documents are not to be removed from the secret archive or safe. In the administrative office of the Diocese of Altoona-Johnstown, across from the bishop's office, was an unmarked door containing multiple file cabinets and boxes. The filing cabinets were marked priest personal, deceased clergy, priests who left the clergy, confidential litigation files, and to be opened only by the bishop or the secretary. Inside the filing cabinets, special agents found files for priests who were accused of sexual misconduct. The filing cabinet held 4 drawers. All 4 drawers had files. We're not just talking about a small stack. The secret archive was a safe contained in the cabinet in the bishop's office, and this safe was under lock and key, which only the bishop controlled. In the file cabinet marked confidential litigation files, the filing cabinet was also 4 drawers and also contained files labeled by the victims' names. As special agents of the Office of Attorney General stood inside this organization, they found themselves surrounded with evidence of an institutional crisis of child sexual abuse. The agents didn't find a couple boxes, rather filing cabinets filled with boxes. Within these documents were handwritten memoranda from Bishop James Hogan, letters and documents of Bishop Adamet, numerous sexual abuse victim statements, letters from sexual abuse victims, correspondence with offending priests, and internal correspondence. The grand jury noted that this physical material is almost entirely related to the individuals named in the grand jury report released today. That history of child sexual abuse and the attempt to conceal the abuse from the public is detailed in this report. The grand jury was able to document child sexual abuse by at least 50 priests or religious leaders within the Diocese of Altoona-Johnstown. The evidence demonstrated hundreds of children have been victimized by religious leaders. Predator after predator went before the grand jury. Each indicated that it was the first time any law enforcement official had questioned them. The nature of this child sexual abuse took on many forms. Children reported having their genitals fondled, being forced to participate, watch, or permit masturbation, being forced to perform or receive oral sex and/or from priests, and being anally raped. The grand jury saw evidence of alcohol and pornography also being provided to the victims by the Catholic priests. The grand jury learned that euphemisms like sick leave and nervous exhaustion were code within the diocese leaders for moving offending priests to another location, while possible attention to a recent claim of child molestation, quote, cooled off. The diocese approved treatment centers like St. Luke's Institute in Maryland, or another treatment center in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, were used to provide cover for bishops. The boy cried, an 8th grader cried, as the priest unzipped the boy's pants and fondled his penis. The boy had stayed after with the priest to collect and count the children's Sunday school offertory collection. Another priest, Father Bodziak, engaged in sexual intercourse with a 16-year-old girl in foster care. She was then removed from foster care and blamed for having a love affair with the priest. A 16-year-old girl was blamed for the sexual abuse committed upon her by a priest. Father Boyle, between 1958 and 1960, Father Boyle engaged in child sexual abuse of a 10 or 11-year-old boy. Boyle engaged in fondling the boy's genitals, masturbation, and oral intercourse with the child. The matter was not reported to the diocese until 1992. In 1969, Boyle was accused of abusing another child, a 12-year-old boy. The matter was reported to the diocese and the Pennsylvania State Police by the boy's irate father. In January 1969, the diocesan leadership noted the events which were occurring in handwritten memos found in the archives of the diocese by the Office of Attorney General Investigators in 2015. And those notes remark that while the victim's father was, quote, a hillbilly, Boyle was ill, and the boy's stories believed by all. Bishop Hogan also noted that it was believed there was sufficient evidence for charges. He then contacted Father Boyle and told him he could move on. After that, in 1970, a letter was dispatched to Father Boyle, and in 1971, Father Boyle was returned to the ministry at St. Catherine's Church in Mount Union, Pennsylvania, less than a year later. Father Boyle then groped the genitals of a 15-year-old boy, and on numerous occasions. He also provided alcohol to the boy. The boy noted the alcohol on Father Boyle's mouth. Between 1973 and 1975, Father Boyle rendered another child unconscious by supplying him with alcohol. After the child was unconscious, Father Boyle anally raped him. Boyle repeatedly raped the boy in the rectory of St. Agnes Church between the boy's 14th and 16th birthdays. In 1982, the same priest, Father Boyle, met a troubling 16-year-old boy and then forced the boy to perform oral sex. The sexual abuse on this child continued for approximately 1 year and evolved into more heinous acts. Father Bunn. Father Bunn's victim was sodomized on numerous occasions. When the child was between 10 and 13 years old. Bunn would stay with the victim's family, consumed alcohol. The entire family, deeply trusted their priest. And the stress of Bunn's victimizations on their son and their family was crushing. The victim's father found himself dealing with intense feelings of anger and violence, and the victim's mother was treated with medication. The victim himself began to struggle with his faith, and abandoned his hopes of being a priest. The victim's parents addressed the violation of the child with Bishop Hogan in March of 1982. The victim himself wrote the bishop in January of 1982, detailing the sexual abuse. Nothing happened. The family again approached the bishop in 1984, noting that Father Bunn was made principal of Bishop McCourt Catholic High School. The family brought a family friend to the meeting with them, a Cambria County judge. They hoped that the bishop would be persuaded to keep his promise and remove Bunn from the ministry. Bishop Hogan removed Bunn as principal of McCourt and assigned Father Bunn to continue in ministry as a parish priest at St. Philip and James Church in Myersdale, Pennsylvania. Bishop Adamek met with Father Bunn in February of 1988, following the family's latest complaint to Bishop Adamek. Monsignor Burkhart. Monsignor Burkhart would say to his victims, he would ask the child a question. What do you think God would say? The victim didn't respond. Monsignor Burkhart filled the silence by stating, God approved. God approved of the sexual acts that the Monsignor was performing on a 9-year-old boy. In 1979, Father Single met his 15-year-old victim while the boy served as an altar boy at Our Lady of Victory in State College. Years later, after undergoing counseling, the victim met with Bishop Adamek in 2002 and explained what occurred, and the bishop vowed he would take action. Records from the diocese show that in 2002, Bishop Adamek met with Father Single. The bishop sent Single to treatment, which concluded on August 3rd, 2001, approximately 1 month later, where that treatment indicated there was no evidence of psychopathology in the psychological data. And following his treatment, Father Single returned to full-time ministry in the Diocese of Altoona-Johnstown. In September of 2015, Father Single was called to the grand jury. He stated that he was currently pastoring at 2 parishes and teaching at 3 worship centers in the Diocese of Altoona-Johnstown. Father Coleman, on August 23, 1979, the parents of a 10-year-old little boy met with Bishop Hogan. Hogan noted in the secret archives of the church that the parents were upset in going over the boy's story. They were distressed over emotional repercussions, involvement with others, possible scandal, father's future, and persuaded of illness. Bishop Hogan met with the 10-year-old boy himself. The 10-year-old boy told of what had happened. On other occasions, Father Coleman asked to take pictures of the child in his underwear and also of rubbing his penis on the feet of numerous little boys. The little boy told the bishop what had happened. Coleman returned to the ministry at St. John's, much to the horror of the victim's family. Within a year of being reassigned to Sacred Heart, Father Coleman invited a 12 to 13-year-old student to the Sacred Heart School and to the rectory to hypnotize them. He then performed the same sexual acts that he performed on the 10-year-old boy. In 1982, Coleman was then removed to St. Benedict, where there he molested at least 3 13-year-old boys. Those are just some of the stories. We can be here all day. It's important that the victim stories are heard because it's important for the horror that they felt for us to feel. It's important that we have an anger and an outrage of what has occurred. It's important for us because of this reason. Because there are heroes amongst us. There's no doubt. There are heroes. There are people who maybe you would think are heroes. But they challenged the system and they wouldn't give up. And one such hero was Mr. George Foster. George Foster was a businessman. He owned billboard advertising business, a devout Catholic who attended church in the Diocese of Altoona-Johnstown. He's a proud father, concerned Catholic. His efforts to expose the conspiracy of silence within the diocese are nothing short of heroic. His mantra was simple. If a priest was unfit for the ministry, they should not be permitted to minister. He wrote an editorial in a local newspaper. He began to then receive calls from victims, stating that certain priests in the diocese were pedophiles. One victim of the sexual assault perpetrated by a priest went to see Mr. Foster personally and report his abuse. The victims were reporting abuse to a layperson who they felt was their hero. They didn't feel they could go anyplace else. They couldn't go to the church leaders. They tried that had failed. They couldn't go to law enforcement at that particular time because that had failed in some instances as well, if it even made it to law enforcement. They reached out to a layperson who wrote a newspaper op-ed. George Foster then slowly became a novice detective, and he decided he wasn't going to make a claim against the bishops. Mr. Foster was contacted by the Office of Attorney General late in 2014, and he responded with, "I'm glad someone is finally doing something." George Foster came to the bishop to see what could be done to fix the Catholic Church, and the bishop chose to respond with threats and attempt to silence a critic. But behind closed doors, Bishop Adamek took steps that showed the widespread nature of the problem. He created a payout chart, a guide used to direct the judgment of the diocese in the payment of claims and in the purchase of silence. He had certain categories for levels of abuse that he and he alone decided, and the range of payment. Level 1 was above the clothing, genital fondling. That's only worth between $10,000 and $25,000. Fondling under the clothes, level 2, masturbation, that's $15,000 to $40,000, and oral sex, $25,000 to $75,000, and sodomy being the worst at a level 4 of $50,000 to $175,000. The chart is noted by the bishop with factors to consider in evaluating a range. Those factors are the number of occurrences, as if one wasn't enough, duration of abuse over time, the age of the victim, the use of alcohol or drugs, apparent effect of abuse on the victims, their psychosis, and other aggravating circumstances. The grand jury noted the cold bureaucracy of this chart. Presently, Bishop Mark Barchak is undergoing his term as Bishop of the Diocese of Altoona-Johnstown, and it's a relatively young term. The grand jury commends Bishop Barchak for the cases in which he has identified action and reporting allegations of child molestation to authorities and removing accused child predators from ministry. Barchak's removal of fathers Kaharchik, Martin, Single, Kelly, and Little were positive steps in the direction of securing the children of the diocese. The grand jury is concerned with the purge of predators and how long it's taking. But Bishop Barchak explained that he's attempted to prioritize his review of diocese materials and remove active or current priests. Bishop Adamek created what's called the Allegation Review Board. Instead of reporting to authorities, he created his own system of justice. And that system of justice was meant to determine the credibility of the allegations of abuse. In reality, the bishop still exclusively makes the decision on how or what to do with that report, and nothing has changed but the trapping of how that report is procedurally made. The grand jury finds that the victims of sexual abuse often engage in delay in reporting, if they report at all. The reasons for delayed reporting are numerous and quite understandable. The trauma of sexual abuse of victims, children, and their families can never be understood by those of us who have escaped that and can never be overstated. The victims find themselves alive as they state, but walking, but feeling dead or dying. The victims reported feeling black inside. Many attempted suicide. A few were successful. A devout Catholic mother stated that the sexual abuse of her son ruined their lives. Their faith and trust in the Catholic Church ruined their lives. For that reason, the grand jury has recommended, and I've always stated, that the statute of limitations on child sexual abuse should be eliminated. There is no time period that we can put on a child to state that he or she should have the strength, he or she should have the capacity, he or she should be strong enough at this point to step out into the public and tell everyone the most embarrassing, humiliating, traumatizing events that have affected their entire life. No one can put a number on that. No one can put an age on that. And if these abusers are allowed to escape from this trap of statute of limitations, why do the victims live with it their entire lives? Why are we protecting the abusers? Why aren't we protecting the victims? For that reason, we again reiterate our position, and we will work with the legislature to encourage them to abolish the statute of limitations in criminal cases and in civil cases. Victims need to be heard. Abolishing this statute would allow these predators to be held accountable until the last day of their lives, because these victims live with it every day of their lives. I don't see the rationale in the statute of limitations. And in civil cases too, there can be no quantification of justice for that victim. Whether it's so that they can obtain counseling, whether they can move on, because don't forget, this affects their financial decisions in their life. It affects their relationships. It affects every single day of their lives. They should be able to choose whether it's criminal or civil. They should have no statute of limitations when it comes to sexual offenses against minors. The grand jury also recommends, and we've always held this belief, the Office of Attorney General since I've been there, that we urge the victims of child sexual abuse and of any abuse to directly contact law enforcement. 911. I know what they feel just from my time as an assistant DA prosecuting child sexual abuse cases. I know they feel that they can't trust anyone. I know that they feel that no one's going to believe them. Maybe it was too long ago, or it's a priest, or a teacher, or a coach. Someone that isn't going to believe a child, someone's going to believe the adult over them. I know how they feel, and I know how difficult that call can be. We're hoping that today you see that there are people who care. There are heroes. There are people out in the public who will step up and be your voice. That's our job. We take that responsibility very seriously, and we encourage victims to directly report to law enforcement officials. And the lesson also from today, from some of the families and from Mr. Foster and from the agents and attorney generals, deputy attorney generals, is that you never give up. The tenacity to continue the investigation, the tenacity to believe where no one else believes, the tenacity to pick up the case when no one else would over 40 years, shows you that there are people who care and that you can trust people. And we hope that you will do that. This investigation is ongoing. In the meantime, we have set up a hotline for anyone with information relating to this case involving the Diocese of Altoona and Johnstown. That will be manned by one of the agents or attorneys who have worked on the case, so they're familiar with your call. That number is 888-538-8541. It's 888-538-8541. We will be able to answer the phone until about 9 o'clock at night. We know that people have jobs. We know that they have families now. And we're trying to accommodate that reason. If for any reason you get a voicemail, if they're on the other line, please know that that voicemail is not going into the vortex. It's not going into the black hole. It will be answered. You will be taken seriously. I want to thank everyone here on the stage, everyone involved in the investigation, all of the victims who came forward, their parents. We want to thank those people for being brave. And we want to say that we're sorry for what has happened to you. But we're hoping that by our support, you know that you can move on, and you can move on with some sort of justice, even though it's in a conference room and not a courtroom. Thank you.
The investigation grew out of the district attorney's referral, and that was more specifically related to Bishop Court. Can you say anything about the Bishop Court case?
I can only tell you that the investigation is ongoing, but it did come out of the referral from District.
Like the district attorney of Blair County or other counties in the 14 county area?
Some of the district attorneys have been contacted during the investigation, as well as contacted perhaps via the report. But this report is made public, and it is provided to the legislature, and it is also provided to those named within the report.
Are there any possibility of charges being brought, like against retired Bishop Adam people who were involved with that era?
The investigation is ongoing, and the tip line was set up so that we could possibly generate more information.
Can you speak more specifically to how long you think Bishop Barchat's addressing his ongoing concerns?
I can only tell you what I read from the report, but judging from the grand juror's report, after speaking with the Deputy Attorney General, we believe that he's on the right track. We hope that he pursues the investigations, he pursues his responsibility vigorously and quickly.
The report says quite a bit about complicity among local law enforcement. Can you speak to that and whether there is any possibility of any charges being brought in that area?
Not to keep the dead horse with this answer, but the investigation is ongoing. That we have had evidence of law enforcement perhaps looking the other way, law enforcement working with the diocese to allow the priest to move on, to retire, law enforcement working to allow the priest to go to some sort of a psychiatric facility in lieu of charges. So we do have that information. This information is outside of the statute of limitations right now, but that is why the hotline was set up, because it's ongoing, and because we believe that in cases like this, once people understand that they have a safe place to go to and they have people who will believe them and not discount their reports, that more information becomes available.
By the numbers, do you know how many victims there are?
Hundreds of victims.
Like 500? Any ballpark?
That can't be quantified.
Okay.
The reason is because as you look through the report and read some of the details in the report, children, in some cases, in case of Father McCaw, reported being molested in groups and looking into the faces of other children as they endured their own molestation, and as he moved down the line and molested the next child in line. So it's very difficult to quantify, but it is hundreds of children in the 8 counties area of the Diocese of Altoona-Johnstown.
And just very quickly, of the 50 priests, are any of these priests still active?
As of today, no. But as of the beginning of the Attorney General's investigation, yes, they were. The office demanded that Father Single be removed, and he was. And but when the report was coming out, a few more resigned. So as of today, no. But during the start of our investigation, yes.
Can you speak to the statute of limitations? I realize it varies crime by crime, but speaking generally, what's the statute of limitations for a civil claim of abuse, and then the longest criminal statute of limitations of any charge that might be relevant?
Yeah, the civil statute is 2 years. As in any civil case, they're all treated exactly alike. You slip and fall on someone's property, it's 2 years. You're sexually abused by a priest, it's 2 years in a civil case.
How would they change that to the age of the victim?
That's in the criminal case. In the criminal case, the statute of limitations is the age of the victim, but it's also a moving target, the statute of limitations. It has been amended, I believe, 3 or possibly 4 times by now, and you have to look at the date of the offense and what statute of limitations applied at that date. It's a complicated process. There's also then the added extension that you may be able to put if that person was a public employee. In this case, there was not that added extension. And using all of the applicable statute of limitations, that's why none of the priests mentioned today were able to be held responsible for their actions as of yet.
You said about an extension for a public employee. What about a police chief or a mayor who helped keep 6 if they be public employees?
That is true. And the public employee is a legal standard that you have to then go before a judge and argue with regard to the statute of
How
limitations.
far back could you go in a case against a public employee?
5 years.
I believe it's 8 in total, but the issue here is it's always going to be very much fact-driven. When did the alleged offense occur? When did the alleged cover-up occur? The individuals named in the report are individuals where we've been able to calculate that the statutes are expired unless we receive new information through the hotline or through other means.
I guess the line I'm trying to put in my story is, the point is, the longest you can extend it, even if all the facts are in your favor, will be 8 years.
Only for.
Right.
Only for
public
public employees, yes.
employees,
Yes.
not priests.
And as Deputy AG Dye indicated, it is very fact-specific. Did it occur on state property? Were they in their official capacity as a state official? So it's very specific. And in this case, none of that applied.
And if I could add, you can see how complex this is, which is why, as the report notes, the diocese historically doing these calculations inside, where they clearly have a vested interest in the outcome, is absurd, which is why the involvement of law enforcement should allow an unbiased analysis of the statute of limitations and potentially exposure, notification, transparency, things the public deserves and needs.
And that internal review in and of itself slows down any report to law enforcement. It slows down any investigation by law enforcement, and it eats up the statute of limitations period.
Do you have an age of the youngest victim?
The youngest I saw in the report was 8.
How many victims actually testified to the grand jury?
I would feel comfortable speaking to how many victims testified. We received information through various means, interviews by the agents on stage as well as other agents. We received information through grand jury testimony, and in many cases through the diocese-owned documents. You have to understand that the diocese itself had maintained many of these records, and in some cases where victims were of advanced age or out of the state, we were able to see in Hogan's own, Bishop Hogan's own handwriting how those meetings went and what those victims said. And in many cases, Bishop Hogan believed them and simply valued protecting the institution from scandal over the public from these predators.
Did you ask any victims to be here today, and that they just were unwilling or unable to be, or was that not something you wanted to do?
This is, we've met with many victims, we've sat at many dining room tables, and this is very, very difficult for them, especially this particular case, because they've lived behind this wall of silence for so many years. And as we met with them time and time again, we heard about how their lives had completely unraveled due to the abuse. Because the abuse permeated their very being. These were individuals that they trusted and that they respected. And in a way, though we make a distinction between the faith and the offender, a child doesn't. And this was their faith offending level. And it was very, very difficult for these children, as it is for many victims of child sexual abuse. And so, quite frankly, to answer your question on point, they're not going to get up, and I understand that, in front of a room full of reporters and talk about the darkest moments of their lives, because quite frankly, sometimes getting up in the morning, making a cup of coffee, and holding down a job is difficult.
Attorney General, the allegations and investigation date back to the 90s, even 2002, where at least 10 priests were found to have been sexually abusing children, and the diocese was found to have concealed those cases. Why did it take so long for the state to get involved? And what new does this grand jury investigation add? Is there something new here that we didn't know back in 2002?
The Attorney General's office became involved in early 2014, and by April 2014, it was in the grand jury. So we acted immediately upon the referral from the District Attorney of Cambria County. As you know, the Attorney General's office does not have original jurisdiction over cases of child abuse or child sexual abuse. We can only investigate and prosecute the case upon referral from the local DA. That's exactly what happened. With regard to what, what new does this offer? It offers a real glimpse between the handwritings of the bishops themselves, between the statements contained in the secret archives. It contains a glimpse and a view into how this cover-up occurs. We hear about it. We heard about it in Boston. We heard about it in Philadelphia. But this grand jury case is factually and documented by paperwork and by